The night air was unnervingly still, the silence broken only by the distant hum of crickets. A dim streetlight flickered above the narrow tree-lined path where she walked, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her stomach as if her palm alone could shield the fragile life inside. She had chosen this secluded route for its peace, never realizing it had been studied, calculated, and chosen for her downfall. Suddenly, a shadow moved with predatory precision from behind the trees, a figure cloaked in black with a mask obscuring every trace of humanity. His boots barely made a sound against the gravel, each step measured, deliberate, as though he were a hunter closing in on his prey. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp spike of fear running through her veins as the figure emerged fully into the dim light. The glint of metal in his gloved hand confirmed her dread. It was no chance encounter, this was an ambush. Instinct surged through her, maternal and primal, urging her to shield the unborn child nestled within her. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, her legs stiffening as if trapped between flight and paralysis. The mercenary tilted his head slightly, his movements cold, detached, almost mechanical, as if every second had been rehearsed. She stumbled back a step, clutching her belly, whispering silent promises to protect the child no matter the cost. A desperate urge to scream clawed at her throat, yet fear bound her voice, allowing only a strangled gasp. The figure raised his hand, signaling her to stop, and though his mask betrayed nothing, the aura around him radiated intimidation. She felt trapped in a nightmare, every instinct warning her of danger, yet somewhere deep inside, a strange familiarity brushed against her terror, though she could not place it. The CEO had built his empire with ruthless precision, the kind that left little room for mercy or weakness. To the world, he was a man of staggering influence, a figure who walked into any room and owned it with a single glance. His suits were custom, his cars rare, his words sharp enough to cut down rivals before they even realized they were being dismantled. But beneath that veneer of success lay an arrogance that poisoned everything he touched. Control was his obsession, control over his business, his image, his home, and most tragically, over the woman he had promised to love. To him, she was not a partner but a possession, another trophy on display to prove his superiority to the world. His wealth gave him the illusion that loyalty and love could be bought, and it was this very arrogance that led him down the path of betrayal. She, his wife, carried herself with quiet grace even as the walls of her marriage closed around her. Intelligent, with a warmth that drew people in, she once believed she could soften his sharp edges. Yet over time, his charm withered into cruelty, and the home that should have been her refuge became a gilded prison. Still, she remained strong-willed, her spirit unbroken despite the emotional chains he wrapped around her. Now, as she carried new life within her, her courage burned brighter, driven by the instinct to protect the child who had already become the center of her world. The mercenary was a man forged in discipline and fire, an ex-Navy SEAL whose entire being was shaped by years of combat and unflinching loyalty to orders. Cold on the surface, his presence alone carried the weight of danger. To him, missions were not moral dilemmas, they were objectives to complete. Efficiency, precision, and silence were his weapons, and his reputation left little room for doubt. Yet behind that hardened exterior lingered a past he rarely spoke of, a family connection he thought long buried. That connection lay in the shadows of the story, a thread tied to the wife herself. Her family was not just a source of comfort but of influence, with her aunt wielding quiet power in circles the CEO underestimated. Bloodlines ran deep, and though he could not see it yet, the bonds of family would soon unravel his carefully constructed control. Powerful men often carry shadows darker than their polished image, and the CEO's motives ran deeper than mere cruelty. His wife, to the public eye, was the picture of elegance and loyalty, the perfect complement to his empire. Yet, behind closed doors, she had become a thorn in his pride. Rumors whispered through boardrooms and luxury galas that she knew too much about his financial manipulations, that she might one day inherit power enough to expose him. Worse still, the child she carried represented not joy, but a threat to his dominion. In his warped logic, the baby was a rival, a potential heir who could shift the balance of his empire, especially if his wife ever claimed her rightful influence. His paranoia twisted every smile she gave, every word she spoke, into potential betrayal. But there was more. Another woman occupied his mind and bed, a mistress who thrived on his arrogance and fanned his flames of greed. To her, he promised a future free from the complications of a wife and child, a future where his wealth would flow unchecked by anyone else's claims. That promise became fuel for his decision, and soon, he began to plot not just a separation but an erasure. When he first approached the Mercenary, it was in a dimly lit private lounge, the kind of place where secrets were traded like currency. He laid out his plan with chilling casualness, sliding across a briefcase thick with cash, his tone dripping with entitlement. "She needs to disappear," he said flatly, as if discussing a business merger. The Mercenary, expressionless beneath the low light, listened in silence, weighing the offer not with morality but with calculation. The sum was obscene, enough to tempt almost anyone, but the CEO's confidence radiated more strongly than the money itself. He truly believed that wealth was the only language men understood. His arrogance blinded him. He never questioned whether loyalty, blood, or conscience could outweigh the allure of his fortune. In his mind, everything had a price: trust, silence, even family ties. As he shook the Mercenary's hand, a smirk tugged at his lips, certain that his wealth had once again bought him absolute control. The CEO treated the scheme like one of his corporate takeovers, dissecting every detail with ruthless precision. He studied his wife's schedule with obsessive scrutiny, noting her favorite walking paths, the hours she left the estate for appointments, even the cafes where she lingered to sip tea. He chose a route tucked between towering trees and weak streetlights, a place where help was scarce and shadows were plenty. Timing was crucial. He wanted her isolated but not missed too quickly, enough to delay suspicion until his alibi was airtight. To the world, he would appear at a charity gala, handshakes and champagne shielding him while his wife quietly vanished from sight. The cover-up was rehearsed like theater, a husband smiling for cameras, pretending ignorance while darkness played out elsewhere. The Mercenary prepared in silence, his discipline sharp as ever. He laid out equipment on a table: rope, zip ties, chloroform, a vehicle with plates too clean to trace. His disguises were precise, each piece calculated to erase his identity: black tactical clothing, gloves that left no prints, a mask that rendered him faceless. He mapped entry and exit points, tested routes, and rehearsed how quickly he could subdue a target without drawing attention. To him, this was procedure, muscle memory from countless missions, yet a sliver of unease prickled at the edges of his thoughts. Meanwhile, the wife moved through her days unaware that eyes followed her every step. The barista who lingered a little too long at the counter, the black SUV parked a block away, the faint sense of being watched, all were brushed off as paranoia. Her phone calls, her visits to the doctor, even the way she held her belly were quietly noted and catalogued. A predator circled without her knowledge, waiting for the moment when the stage was set. Small signs flickered in her periphery, whispers of danger she couldn't name. The gardener's hurried glance, the sudden malfunction of her security camera, the silence of her husband's late-night absences, tiny clues that hinted at cracks beneath her reality. But love, denial, and exhaustion dulled her suspicion. By the time she sensed that something wasn't right, the trap was already closing in. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes as she made her way down the secluded path. The faint glow of a flickering streetlight painted her shadow across the ground, long and fragile. She tightened her coat around her body, her other hand resting instinctively against the swell of her belly. A whisper of unease pricked her skin, the kind that told her she wasn't alone. She quickened her pace, but the air shifted, a presence behind her, deliberate, inescapable. Before she could react, a dark figure stepped from the trees, blocking her path with frightening precision. Clad in black from head to toe, his face hidden behind a mask, he moved like a predator who had rehearsed every motion. Her breath caught, and fear surged through her chest. "Please, don't," she managed, her voice trembling as her hands shielded her stomach. She took a desperate step back, but he advanced, silent, measured, his gloved hand gesturing her to stop. Her pleas spilled out in broken gasps, desperation laced with terror. "I'm pregnant. Please, don't hurt me, please." The words cracked in the night air, but the Mercenary didn't respond. He stood still, his stance powerful yet strangely hesitant, as though some unseen force pulled at him. She clutched her belly tighter, her body trembling, her instincts screaming to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. Something about her voice stopped him. It wasn't the tone of fear, he had heard that countless times. It was the cadence, the familiarity buried beneath her panic. His training urged him forward, to complete the mission, to silence hesitation, but the sound gnawed at him, tearing at the steel walls he had built around himself. She lifted her head just enough for her eyes to meet his, wide and glistening under the dim light. In that instant, something flickered in him, a fracture in his cold exterior. Though his mask hid his face, his chest tightened with recognition he could not place. He steadied his breath, forcing himself to move, yet every step felt heavier, slower. The woman before him wasn't just a target. Something about her presence pressed on a memory he thought long buried, a bond stirring beneath layers of orders and money. For the first time in years, the mercenary hesitated. Her voice cracked again, pleading through the night air, and it pierced deeper than any weapon could. The mercenary froze, his breath caught inside his mask. Something in the way she spoke, the inflection of her words, tugged at a place in his memory long untouched. Against his will, images surfaced, sunlit summers at a countryside home, children chasing each other across fields, laughter echoing in the distance. He saw her as a little girl, braids falling over her shoulders, running toward him with the trust only family could inspire. The sound of her calling his name then matched the trembling tone of her voice now. His grip on the weapon faltered. A lifetime of discipline screamed at him to stay focused, to silence emotion and finish the mission. Yet, the face behind the fear wasn't just any woman, it was her. His cousin. The one he had once sworn, as a boy, to protect from bullies in the yard, the one who shared secrets under starry skies before their lives took them far apart. Now fate had twisted cruelly, placing him as her predator instead of her shield. Inside his chest, conflict raged like a storm. The contract was clear, the money too large to ignore. Years of service had drilled into him the idea that orders came before everything. But family had been the only thread of warmth he'd ever known. Could he really betray blood for cash? She studied him through her tears, her gaze locked on his eyes, the only part of him not hidden by the mask. Slowly, recognition dawned across her face. "It's you, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice a mixture of hope and disbelief. The words shook him to his core, stripping away the last barrier he had tried to maintain. In that moment, the mercenary was no longer faceless, no longer a weapon for hire. He was her cousin, torn between duty and blood, staring at the choice that could redefine them both. The mercenary stood motionless, his chest rising and falling in heavy silence as the truth of who stood before him carved through every layer of steel he had built around himself. The CEO's orders echoed in his mind like a command he could not escape: make her disappear, erase the problem. The money offered was enough to buy comfort for years, to bury his conscience beneath luxury. Yet the face of the woman before him was no stranger. It was family, the girl who had once clung to his arm during thunderstorms, trusting him to keep her safe. To harm her now would mean betraying not just blood, but the boy he once was. Inside, a war raged. Betray the CEO, and he risked everything: his reputation, his life, the wrath of a man who wielded wealth like a weapon. Betray her, and he severed the last real tie to humanity he still carried. His choice could not be delayed, but hesitation itself became his shield. With a sharp movement, he gestured for her to move, playing the part of captor while masking the turmoil behind his eyes. To anyone watching, it looked like obedience to contract. But in his mind, a different plan began to take shape, one that would turn the CEO's own scheme back against him. The wife's eyes followed every motion, terror mingling with a spark of something else: doubt, curiosity, even hope. She saw the slight tremor in his hand, the fraction of a pause when he could have struck but didn't. Her instincts, sharpened by fear, told her this man was conflicted. And slowly, a fragile thread of trust began to form. She clutched her belly, whispering prayers under her breath, while silently praying that his hesitation meant salvation. Finally, the mercenary made his choice. Beneath the mask, his jaw tightened, and his grip on the mission dissolved. He would not betray blood, not for any price. The CEO believed money bought loyalty, But in this moment, the mercenary chose family. He shifted his stance, no longer her predator but her shield, silently vowing to protect her from the very man who had ordered her destruction. The trap that was meant for her became the weapon aimed at him. Under the cover of night, the mercenary altered every detail of the plan the CEO had so carefully constructed. The vehicle he had prepared no longer waited to carry away a victim, but stood ready to deliver proof of betrayal. Every step, every movement, became part of a silent rebellion against the man who thought money could bend blood to his will. When the confrontation finally came, it was not in the quiet shadows but within the opulence of the CEO's country estate, where wealth dripped from the walls like arrogance made tangible. The wife stood tall in the center of the room, her hand resting firmly on her belly. No longer the trembling figure of fear but a woman refusing to be silenced. Her voice cut through the air with strength. "You tried to erase me. You tried to erase your own child. But you failed." The CEO's face twisted, disbelief etched in every line. He looked past her toward the mercenary, fury burning in his eyes. "I paid you," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Do you know what that money meant?" The mercenary's silence was louder than any denial. His presence alone was betrayal enough, a declaration that loyalty could not be bought when family stood in the balance. For the first time, the CEO's confidence cracked. He had lived his life believing that wealth could purchase loyalty, love, silence, even fate itself. But now, stripped of control, he faced the one truth he could never manipulate: blood was stronger than money. The confrontation ended not with his victory but with his empire trembling beneath the weight of his arrogance. The carefully built empire crumbled the moment the truth slipped into the light. What the CEO believed would remain hidden in shadows was dragged into the open, piece by piece, until the world saw the monster behind the polished smile. Evidence of the attempted kidnapping surfaced, recordings of his negotiations with the mercenary preserved as undeniable proof. Whispers of corruption that once lingered in closed-door meetings became headlines plastered across every screen. The narrative shifted overnight, not a powerful visionary, but a man willing to sacrifice his own wife and unborn child for pride and control. Authorities moved swiftly, raiding his offices, freezing accounts, and seizing files long buried under secrecy. The media descended like vultures, replaying footage of his arrogance at public events alongside revelations of betrayal. Once loyal board members, sensing the fall, turned their backs with calculated ease, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. Investors withdrew, allies vanished, and his empire collapsed in a storm of disgrace. At the center of the chaos stood his wife, no longer the silenced partner trapped in a gilded cage. Supported by her family, she spoke with a strength that drew admiration, recounting the ordeal not as a victim but as a survivor. Her aunt, powerful in her own right, stood beside her, ensuring the world knew where true loyalty lay. The mercenary, her cousin, remained in the shadows, his choice unspoken but clear in every outcome. The CEO, once untouchable, now faced the weight of justice. His wealth could not buy silence, nor could his arrogance command obedience. In losing everything, he revealed the hollowness of the empire he worshipped. She, on the other hand, emerged stronger, carrying not just her child but the unshakable proof that even the mightiest can fall. In the quiet that followed the storm, she began to piece together a new life, one not gilded with false promises but grounded in resilience. The mansion that once felt like a prison was replaced with a home filled with warmth, where laughter could echo without fear. She carried her child with pride, no longer a pawn in someone else's game but a symbol of her strength and survival. Freedom had not come easily, but now it was hers, carved from courage and determination. For the mercenary, the choice he made lingered like a scar, painful yet defining. He had lived years as a man of orders, believing loyalty belonged to contracts and missions. But in that single moment, when faced with blood and memory, he chose family over fortune. The money that once tempted him became meaningless compared to the quiet relief of knowing he had protected rather than destroyed. His path would always be shadowed by discipline and regret, but at least one decision gave him peace. The story, at its core, was not only about betrayal but also about the strength of loyalty that cannot be bought or sold. The CEO had believed power and wealth made him untouchable, but his downfall proved otherwise. In the end, justice was not only in the courts or the headlines, it was in the resilience of a woman who refused to break, and in the unshakable truth that family, when honored, holds more power than any empire built on lies.